morning and welcome to the Point. This week, Governor Rick Snyder sat down with us to talk about the current legislative session. He also talked about his priorities when it comes to fixing roads. That and a continuing controversy over a national committee man. Governor, let's talk about the process that's going on in Lansing right now, which is the budget. Since you've taken office, the budget has been done much earlier. Looks like it's on track again this year, but there are some differences. Just this week in a House Appropriations Subcommittee, they made significant changes to the Department of Human Services budget that you would ask for a surcharge to help pay for low-income home heating, if I'm not mistaken. In that committee, they decided to do it differently that could have a significant impact on the total number of employees at DHS, which is a very big department. I know it is a process. That's not the end of the story, but how comfortable are you with the way the process is moving?
Well, I think the process is coming along. As you said, Rick, it goes through those cycles. And I think if you look back at the last 2 years, we could go find either subcommittees reporting out something that was dramatically different, committees reporting something out, and either the House or the Senate. Because it's that collaborative relationship. Everyone kind of has their opportunity to speak up and put things together, and then we'll work through it. And that's where I've been confident that we'll come out with a good answer.
When you look at this process, you keep a close eye, and I know John Nixon keeps a close eye on the dollars and cents and what's traveling into the state. Is the state financially, and I know we're not, you don't have tons of extra money to spend, but is there more flexibility in budgeting now because the state has at least stabilized?
Well, we have stabilized and we've improved. There's fundamental improvement, so we're better off. The issue is we can't go back to the old ways of doing things. That's my biggest concern, is we shouldn't look in the rearview mirror. There's a bright future ahead of us, and we need to invest smartly for that. And I'll give you an illustration. Is one of the things we're really focused on funding that does take a fair amount of those extra resources, and I wouldn't say that there are a lot of extra resources, is we're making sure we're putting in those payment plans for the retirement systems, for both state employees and for the public employees that we are responsible for. And those are taking additional resources. But there's a big payoff in the future years. One of the things, if you look at school funding, for example, the schools are going to avoid a bill of over $300 per student they would be getting, essentially, because we're putting in a real payment plan that we had not done for a very long time in our state.
Part of that adds up to something to the effect of what was a $50 billion liability for the state, which is about equivalent to 1 year's budget for the entire state. And that had to do with healthcare plans, pension plans, and those kind of things. And one of your real pushes when you were first elected is you wanted to address those long-term costs that have plagued places like California and Illinois and caused tax increases and some other problems. Where are we now with that big liability?
Oh, we've done much better, but it's not done. What I would say is it was roughly 45 to 50 billion. You described it well. We've essentially taken a third of that away. Literally $15 billion plus we can take off the balance sheet. And we did that by reforming things for future hires, reforming benefits for the future. Again, not taking anything away from vested benefits that people had earned. And the second piece is, this is the point about saying we're fully funding. We're actually putting out a responsible payment plan. So one way to look at for many people would be, when you get that credit card bill, do you pay the amount that is really due to do a good payment plan, or do you do the minimum payment? And in some cases at the state for a number of years, we weren't even really making the minimum payment in some ways. And so you know what happens then. Your interest goes up, your costs go up dramatically. So putting in a regular payment plan that's responsible really drops that liability number by a lot.
You mentioned education, and if you decide to run for governor next year, that Democrats are going to complain loudly about the way you have funded, or the way they will say you have not funded K through 12 education. As this process moves forward, part of that is that you are funding, from your perspective, some of the retirement costs, but they're going to talk about dollars and cents going into the classroom. What is your thought process when you start thinking about putting money into K through 12?
Well, we've done a lot. If you go back, I did this in the budget presentation. We had a slide on this that said if you looked at fiscal year 10 and you compared it to the budget we're proposing now, there's about a 14% increase in K through 12 funding. The difference from the way they perceive it is it was always just in the foundation allowance. Well, we're putting a lot of it into these retirement costs, these other costs, but that ends up in the classroom essentially too, because if you think about it, they were getting a bill otherwise to say they had to pay. Well, paying that bill meant they had less for the classroom. So in many respects, we're just more directly funding some of it. So doesn't that end up in the classroom too? It does. So we're made a significant investment in K through 12 in terms of funding, but it's also we're putting a real focus on student growth. It's not just about money, it's about the kids. And we want to work closely with the schools. There are great people in the school system on student growth.
As we said in talk, we're in the MDOT headquarters for the Grand Region. Earlier this week, you talked about a new silver line for mass transit in the city of Grand Rapids. And no secret that one of your big pushes in this budget process is to try to find money for Michigan roads. And that will be done perhaps separate from the current budgeting process, almost has to be. But you've talked about $1.2 billion a year over a 10-year period. You've laid out the case that spending money now saves money in the long term. Where are you in that process, given that it is, as I suggested to you back in January, going to be a hard sell, and so far it's at least been challenging?
Well, it is a hard sell because of the political process, because of politics and our broken political culture in this country. As I said in the State of the State, if we're sitting around the kitchen table and we're just going through our budgets and saying, hey, where do we need to invest? Do we need to do something smart here? Absolutely. This is an easy call because it's pay me now this much and on a periodic payment plan or pay this huge amount later. This will create jobs. This will save lives of our citizens. So making this investment in roads is just smart. It's just like, do you get an oil change or do you wait to rebuild your engine? So we need to do that, but when you get into the political process, you get a lot of people looking to say, well, they're up for election next year, and they're afraid to say they had to ask for increased revenue. Well, this is the right thing. This saves Michiganders money over the long term, and that's where I need the people to speak up to say, does anyone like our roads? And wouldn't we like better roads, more jobs, and save lives?
You run into the problem when people, as they did in our town hall meeting at the station a few weeks ago, virtually everybody agreed that the roads need to be fixed. But when it comes down to paying a higher registration fee or more at the gas pump, you get some pushback.
Yeah, and that's part of the process, though. That's where I'm happy to look at other options, alternatives. We got a good proposal out. So I'm waiting for the legislators to come back, both parties, both chambers, to say, here's different ideas and thoughts. Let's acknowledge there's a problem. Now let's talk about what works best, and let's come up with a good solution that can work for all. Because this is a good opportunity for us, Rick, and this is important. We put this off since '97 was the last time we did something. And we didn't fully solve the problem then. So it's not right to keep maintaining and having a problem just grow on us. Let's solve it.
Governor, we've been talking about policy, we've been talking about budget, we've been talking about things that you have focused on. I need to take you down a political path for a minute. You are not unfamiliar with Dave Agem, the National Committee man, and the comments that he posted from someone else on Facebook. You've already weighed in on that and talked about that process. But talk to me about the larger issue of messaging for your party, and maybe even beyond the party, the things that we should be talking about. How much does a conversation like this, that has to do with same-sex marriage and the viewpoints of other people, how much does that play into the conversation that we're trying to have here in the state of Michigan?
Well, it's not helpful. If you look at it, and again, we shouldn't be discriminating against anyone. And I've been pushing bullying, anti-bullying for a long time because I was bullied for being a nerd. So we need to stand up and make sure people have their ability to be who they need to be. As a practical matter beyond that, though, we need to stay focused on jobs and kids. Jobs is the big issue still. We've made a massive improvement in reducing unemployment in our state. We're down 5 percentage points since 2009. But there's still too much, more than I'd like to see, and we need to keep on working on doing that. So let's stay on that path.
We're out of time, so we've got about 15 seconds. Where's the bridge?
The bridge is making progress. The presidential permit's the next step, and I hope we get that permit anytime. So we're right on the edge of moving forward with it.
At the end of our interview, the governor talked about that new bridge in Detroit and said that federal approval could be coming soon. He was right about that. On Friday afternoon, the Fed said yes, the state of Michigan and Canada can build that new bridge. Now, that's not the final step, but it's a big hurdle. We'll continue to follow that new international trade crossing. And we'll have more to the point in just a moment. Welcome back to the Point. Last week here on the show, we talked with the new head of the Michigan Democratic Party, Lon Johnson. This week, we talk with the Republican Party chief, Bobby Shostak. Mr. Chairman, first of all, thanks for being here, and congratulations on being reelected to the position for another 2 years.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's start there. Let's start with that convention, and that was a relatively close election. Not as close or with the same kind of outcome that the Democrats had by getting a new chairman. Give me the tone. What was that like?
Sure. You know, look, the competition is good. A lot of good ideas came out, good discussion. And in the end, I prevailed. But I appreciate the input I got along the way. You know, I traveled the state extensively during the process of getting him reelected, and had some great endorsements, had some great support, but also got some great input from those that thought there were some things that could be done differently. So we came out united. We're all working together. We got a big agenda in 2014, and we're going to hit our mark.
The Republican Party, and when I say the Republican Party, I talk about that great big Republican Party across the country, has a real discussion going on with its members, its elected officials, the folks who are voting, about the direction of that party, what you stand for, where you want to go. Which is not to suggest that people can't articulate what you stand for, but there are discussions about how you proceed with that. How much of that came up at the convention?
Well, first of all, the Growth Opportunity Project, which is what Chairman Priebus, Reince Priebus, has created a committee to bring forth a new plan, a new approach, has a very wide range of issues associated with it. Messaging being, platform just being one small part of it. You know, everything from when we have a convention to the number of primaries, the number of debates, and on and on and on. How we engage coalitions, how we do it across the country, not just as an overall, approach, overall message. And a lot of the questions or challenges that folks put up inside Michigan and other large states, key states around the country, were these same issues. And we asked ourselves those questions over at the state party, during the course of the election and all through our kind of post-election review is, what can we do differently? What can we do better? What can we learn from the past? Where were our strengths? Where were our weaknesses? The classic thing, don't repeat the same mistakes, and let's find new ones to make next time, but at least improve upon the old. And so there are things that the Growth Opportunity Project are identifying that Chairman Priebus is rolling out, but there's also things that we in Michigan are going to be doing and doing them right now as we approach the 2014 elections.
Is the result of the last election cycle, where Republicans did prevail, they kept the state house, they kept the U.S. House, but they lost seats in both. The president obviously was reelected, and Republicans did not do well with minority groups on most fronts. Is the problem in that area, or the problem overall when it comes to elections for Republicans, is it the message or the ability to get the message out? In other words, is it what you're saying, or is it the fact that people aren't hearing it, you aren't saying it in a way that connects?
I think the biggest part of the problem is not the message, not the words. It's our methodology in getting it out and how we're choosing to engage with coalitions. We need to be more peer-to-peer. We tend to be more global and at a macro level at 30,000 feet. And what it means here in Michigan is we have to take it really very much to the grassroots of all coalitions and have our activists, one of their own if you may, engage with those communities, those coalitions, and bring the message forward. And that's what we're going to be doing in Michigan. And I think that's frankly the national problem with the Republican Party, or the challenge they have, is we are very strong in certain groups and we're very weak in others. And what are we doing to expand our voter universe? What are we doing to make our tent available with a very appropriate conservative message that fits a whole lot of people and their needs, but yet we're somehow not connecting with them?
Anybody who has ever been involved with a group of more than two people know that you have conflict. And political parties are no different. I think Will Rogers famously said one time that he's not part of any organized political party, he's a Democrat. And that was at a time when there was a lot of upheaval in the Democratic Party. Within the Republican Party, there are a lot of voices, and some of them are more strident and perhaps sometimes a little louder than some of leadership would like to be. And I'm speaking about the National Committee man, Dave Agema. Comments he recently made, and it came from a Facebook post, and quite frankly, has been kind of driven by another Republican who has been reposting it all over and trying to kind of stir up some sentiment for him to resign. Talk to me about the difficulty of trying to keep everybody in the party on message.
Right, and that is a challenge. Look, we're a party of ideas. We're a party of a wide range of people. We have some very conservative people. We have people that are from the Liberty Movement. We have folks that are traditional GOP activists from our counties and in our congressional districts that have been with us for a lot of years. Tea Party organizations. Been a great thing, I think, overall for the Republican Party. It's gotten folks reactivated and engaged, and it's forcing all of us to watch how we're doing things and be very, very strategic and thoughtful, both in our votes as elected officials, as well as our message. And you know, you're right, more than 2 people. We have a lot more than 2 people that I got to get my arms around and hopefully include them all in the process. And the message is, I think, very generally consistent with 80 to 85, 90% of the people. There are a few that tend to, push one or single agenda item a little bit more than others, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for them in the Republican Party. We have room for them, and it's an important conservative message that's out there, and we're a party, in the case of this other situation, of traditional values. We believe in traditional marriage, and we understand the importance of that as a party, as society, as Americans, and we're going to talk about that, and it is important to us.
And in fact, it's on the national platform, if I'm not mistaken.
It is, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your counterpart. Lon Johnson, who was on this show last week, is the new chairman of the Michigan Democratic Party. And he brings kind of a new toolbox to that position, which is not to suggest that Mark Brewer hadn't been very involved in fundraising. Mr. Johnson made it very clear when he was here, that's going to be a real key, because there are going to be some very expensive races coming up that we'll talk about later in the show. What do you think going forward? Are Democrats better poised to raise money going into the next election cycle?
Well, they're going to need to raise money. I mean, this is going to be an expensive cycle. I welcome Chairman Johnson to the state and back to the state. I suspect he'll do a good job. He's a very thoughtful fella. He's a business guy. He has a similar background to me. I think he'll bring some good semblance of structure to the Republican or Democratic Party. However, this is a very challenging year, I think, for the Democrats. We have a very deep bench for all of the available seats here. We have a lot of incumbents. The Democrats have a thin bench. They don't, nobody's surfacing for the governor's race. Nobody's definitely surfaced for the U.S. Senate seat, notwithstanding the announced retirement of Carl Levin. So I think we're in a good position. We're going to work hard. We're not taking anything for granted. Michigan's recovery is strong. Governor Snyder has a good record to run on. Is it everything where we want it to be just yet? No. That's why we deserve and will get another 4 years for our governor, our attorney general, our secretary of state, keep our majorities in the House and the Senate and our Supreme Court, and win the ed board seats. Lots to do.
Well, when you look at what this next cycle really means, there are 110 seats up in the House. Everything is up over in the Senate. You've got the U.S. Senate seat of which you spoke, all the U.S. House seats, and then all of the constitutional offices, and Ed Board, and Supreme Court, all of those things that are out there. Where do you begin the focus? Because you have to raise money. You have to get people invigorated. You've got 25, 26 House seats that are always competitive out there. So you have to have the right candidates if you don't have incumbents, and assuming that the incumbents, are the right candidates. You've got all of these races to look at. Where do you start? You start at the top of the ticket? Do you start at the precinct level? How do you get organized for something that takes in everything except one U.S. Senate race and the president?
We start right now with our political plan, our war plan, if you may, to execute our game plan to turn out vote by first identifying voters. And we're doing that in new ways in Michigan. We're breaking the state into 5 or 6 regions. We're going to decentralize, regionalize much of our activity, push as much out into the field as possible. We'll have communications people, digital people, communications director, regional political directors, and coalitions. We spoke about that a few minutes ago. Every coalition will be viewed by us as a possible voter for the Republicans on the ticket. And we will be going deep into those coalitions with one of their own to talk about the issues and establish peer-to-peer relationships with them. And that's what we'll be doing now. Normally, we have, during election year, pop-up election centers, information centers, victory centers, if you may, that open up, 4 to 6 months before an election. In 2013, a good year and a half out, we're going to be starting these activities, and we're going to be getting very deep into the roots of the grassroots of our party and of the voters of Michigan. From there, along with it, we'll be raising the money. I've already started. You know, our donors are in Michigan to the Republican agenda have been very generous in the past, and I expect they will continue to be. And we'll build up our war chest necessary, as will the campaigns for the elected officials that they raise their dollars for, will also be successful. And as we roll this out and move towards 2014 and into the summer of 2014, we expect to keep all of our majorities that are there today, keep our Supreme Court at the levels we have today, knowing we're now at 5-2, and keep our congressional members in Washington at 9 seats. And the real prize for us, aside from the governorship, will be to win that United States Senate seat. And we have some great candidates looking at it. And so there's not one priority over the other necessarily. They're all important, but we will be obviously looking very closely at taking everything we can.
Well, let's start from the top. You've got a U.S. Senate race. This is an opportunity for Republicans, and that does not mean that I am suggesting Republicans will win, but anytime you don't have an incumbent to run against from the other party, that's an opportunity for the opposition party. Republicans have not held a seat in the United States Senate for Michigan since about 2000. I think that was the race where Senator Stabenow was first elected. So the question is, how do you get organized to win that race, raise the money and do all of that when you know almost certainly, unless you're a magician, you're going to have a pretty good primary?
Yeah, we'll have a primary. There'll be several people looking at it. We're hearing from, obvious suspects that are out there. And that primary will help make us a stronger, a general election candidate. And we'll take on whoever the Dems bring us. But it's going to be an expensive race. There's no question about it. It'll be very vibrant. The primary, it'll probably be, I'm guessing, about a 3-person primary. I don't think it'll get up to 5 or 6, but I could be wrong. We're hearing great names that folks are looking to get into it, and we have time. Thankfully, Senator Levin gave us a lot of notice. There's no urgency. Generally, by our Mackinac conference in September is when we'd have a candidates forum for the U.S. Senate, and I expect that by then we'll know really who's in it.
Well, and we have talked about, we being in the media have talked about a number of people who may or may not be involved in this. But I'm going to give you 2 names because I want to move this to the next conversation. Those 2 names would be Mike Rogers and Justin Amash. They're both current members of the United States House of Representatives. If they both decide to get in the primary, now you've got 2 open House seats. So it just kind of exacerbates the election process.
Right. And I kind of doubt that'll happen. Both would be great to get in the race. I suspect that between them, they're more likely to work that out. But regardless, we don't know that Mike Rogers will get in. We don't know that Justin will get in. We don't know, maybe Dave Camp will get in. Terry Land is talking about running. Salanuzis is talking about running. I mean, so there's a number of really good names. I think that, we got good statewide recognition with any of the names that you mentioned, which put us in a pretty strong position going into that election in 2014. So I like the fact that A, we've got a lot of notice. 2, we've got good names that have statewide recognition. And 3, at the top of the ticket will be Governor Snyder. And Governor Snyder is going to be running on a pretty good record. And Governor Snyder is going to be a governor that I believe that people are going to be looking at on both sides of the aisle, Democrats, Independents, Republicans. They will say that's somebody that we can support because of the initiatives he's put forward has really transformed Michigan, reinvented Michigan.
Our conversation with the head of the Michigan Republican Party continued, but we had to cut it short because of our interview this morning with the governor. We'll be talking with both the head of the Michigan Republican Party and the Michigan Democratic Party a lot between now and decision 2014. And we'll be back with more To the Point in just a moment. In just over 2 months, we expect the state legislature to have a budget done. They've been getting them done more quickly since Governor Snyder took office, and their unofficial deadline is the 1st of June. We'll be keeping a close eye on where that budget process is and exactly how that will impact you. Plus, in Washington, there are still big decisions to be made on everything from gun control to immigration. Those arguments are heating up. We'll be talking to the principals right here every Sunday morning when you join us. To the Point.